Well, look, thank you all for coming out. I just wanted to be able to spend some time with you. I know there are a lot of questions about the decision to not join the Pac-12, where we are with the American Athletic Conference. And I promised y'all during my press conference that I'd always be transparent as I can. And I figured that this would be a good way for us to be able to have some question and answers. And instead of me putting out a statement, right? You did see a statement from the institution, but you didn't see a statement individually from me. And so I thought it was important that our constituents had a chance to hear from their athletic director. So I'm ready and willing to take whatever questions I can, and I'll be as transparent as I possibly can, given the fact that some of the information is obviously confidential because it's negotiations. So with that being said, please ask away.
Dr. Scott, what is the crux of the decision? What did this come down to? Reasons you stated, reasons you didn't take that offer?
Yeah, I think it came down to three things. One is the business side of the decision. Two, as I'm learning, because I think most of you know now, I've been at Memphis for almost 60 days, right? So I'm still learning about the emotional scars that Memphis feels from being left out of some other conferences. And then I think lastly, it really came down to what our future looks like, right? And so those were the three buckets that we looked at. The financials were not there. Emotionally, I understand why people are upset. I read almost everything y'all put out. Okay, I'll tell you that. I consume massive amounts of information on purpose because I'm still trying to learn. And so I know there are some people who feel a way and emotionally about the decision, but they don't know all the information. And then what does our future look like? And I think you'll see, hopefully, within about 5 to 6 years, almost all the major media rights deals are coming up. And I think that's really important that we need to be cognizant of that and what that landscape looks like in 5 to 6 years. And so those were the real reasons that we made the decision, because we looked at it, and from my perspective, in a three-pronged approach.
Did the American offer any incentive to stay whatsoever?
Well, so look, this is why I wanted to talk to you. I want to address some of that. Everything is on the table with the Americans. So there is no deal for additional revenue at this time. But I've heard some of you report about the ESPN, and I want to look at you, Tim, when I say this. You didn't report this, but I like to address the people I'm talking to. I've heard some folks talk about the ESPN look-in. What I can tell you is I've seen enough of that contract, and specifically that look-in, where that money cannot go down. So any of you who are reporting that the money will go down during that look-in, it's actually an inaccurate reporting. And so I want to correct that for the record. The money can actually only go up in the American, as that look-in says. So there's nothing on the table now that tells us we're going to get more money. And I would also say, just contextually, you should see what the shares are of the new members, because some of them are getting more money than they expected, but they might not be getting as much money as Memphis, right? So no, to answer your question directly, but there's more context, because when there is inaccurate reporting, I want to make sure that I do correct that for our constituents so they understand.
Terry Davis, Tri-State Defender. Where do you go from here?
Where do I go from here? I try to beat Middle Tennessee State on Saturday, right? I mean, no, I'm being honest with you, right? So I think this is one of the things that I'm learning about Memphis, is that a lot of folks, and some of you in the media, candidly, want us to go to be great, and sometimes you got to be great to go, right? And so when I hear people say, I'm not going to buy tickets and I'm not going to support the programs, you're not really hurting me. You're hurting the student athletes, right? And you're hurting the people that are on the field playing. And that's really, really important for me. So where does this go? If y'all haven't seen the latest reports of what's going on between the Mountain West and the Pac-6, 7 right now, this is a fluid situation, right? So that's the other thing. When we talk about the decision that was made by the University of Memphis to not join the Pac, as I like to call them right now at this time, that was not a binary decision. That was not a no, we're not ever going anywhere. That was based on the offer that was presented in front of us, that we're not taking that offer because we don't think less of ourselves. And I came here for a reason. You heard me in the press conference. You've heard me in any interview I've done. I'm bullish on Memphis's future. And so I think sometimes we get enamored by the new and we want to take a bad deal. And that deal was not a good deal for the University of Memphis. It certainly wasn't a good deal for our athletic department. And most importantly, it was a really, really bad deal for our Olympic sports.
Dr. Scott, Greg Gaston, Sports 56 Radio. The rumored amount of money that the Pac-12 was going to give you guys for an exit fee, which would have been, what, 2.5 is what was reported. How truthful is that?
Accurate. Answer, it's a yes or no question, right? So
yes.
the answer is accurate. So here's the math, right? Let's talk about the math on this. I said the first prong was finances, right? So if we owe $25 million, which is precedent by SMU of what they did to get out, right? And yes, it can be negotiated. I heard what Gary said, and we can address that in a little bit later. But if it's $25 million to get out, we're getting offered $2.5. That still leaves a gap of $22.5 million. Okay? If we're talking about a 5-year deal, right, to get through 2031, right, if you start in 2026, that still leaves you $22.5 million that you got to pay back over 5 years, because if you're not in the Pac and you go somewhere else, you're still paying the American back from getting out, right? And there's another piece of the deal without putting all of the information out there. Part of the deal was that 2 of the schools, and you can figure out who those were, would be able to keep all of the college football playoff annual distribution money, right? So here's how I look at the math. If we're getting about $9 million right now from the American, and estimated between the consultants and our folks in-house, it was going to cost about $2.5 million, because the offer was for all sports, not just football, men's and women's basketball, to be clear. It's going to cost us about another $2.5 million to travel, right? So to be whole, that's $11.5 million. If folks are speculating on the low end that this deal's around $12 million, that means we net a positive $500,000, right? And we still owe 22.5. So that means if I apply the net positive of a $500,000 to that number, we still owe 22 million, right? And that's not investing any additional money into our football, basketball, or other programs. Let's talk about travel for our Olympic sports before you ask about that, because a lot of folks are only talking about football and basketball. And I stood up here in the Laurie Walton Center and told you I'm the AD for everybody, black, white, and everybody in between, and that includes our Olympic sports, right? So we've done the math on this. Travel-wise, it would be about 20,000 miles that our teams would have to travel in order to compete with the 7 schools that are in there, okay? And that's if everything was a direct flight, and there's not a direct flight from Memphis to Corvallis or Memphis to Pullman, Washington. Do you know how far it is to go around the circumference of the earth? Just under 25,000 miles. So we're going to take and put those young people on a commercial flight, right? And we're going to fly them that far to play a volleyball match that I watched against Wichita State last night, and my team who's here can correct me. It was maybe 2 hours long, and then we're going to fly them all the way back. I just don't think that was the right thing to do based on the finances we had. Now, if there was more money involved and we can charter them back so they can get back for class, right? They can recover better. That's a different conversation. And so I just think, I appreciate the question, because I think sometimes folks are just focusing on what they want to make their argument, and I had to look at all this, right? And so that's really how we looked at the finances in that situation.
Scott,
Yeah.
As you speak about traveling, did the concern for fans traveling ever come across your guys' mind?
It did, but if I look at the message boards and all the stuff that was put out there, our fans want to travel because they want to see some of those locations and play against those teams, right? And they say they're more likely to buy tickets than when those teams come into our stadiums, right, into our arenas. My concern with that is what I said before. If you really care about Memphis, then you'd be supporting us now, right? And so I understand the emotional piece of that, but that did go into it. And there are some destinations that are important to our base. I've learned our people like New Orleans. They really like New Orleans. They also like Las Vegas, right? And so those things are important to me. You know, I want to make sure that as we're doing this, we do have to take into account what's important to the fans and to the city of Memphis, right? And that went into our calculus as well. It wasn't just financial. When I hear people say spreadsheets and, you know, it's easy to justify not making the financial move, yeah, that was really easy. But the other parts that went into it too, I don't think warranted us making the move at this time based on what we were being offered.
A couple of things. Do you foresee the Pac revisiting, like re-engaging you guys?
Listen, they all have my phone number. I've heard from multiple of those ADs, their consultants, and so if they call, I'm answering. I've never not answered a call when anyone from another school or another conference has called. So if they call, I'm going to listen. That's my job. And I'm glad you asked that, because here's something I really want to get out. And I need everybody to hear me loud and clear when I say this. We didn't say no to Memphis's future. We said no to a deal that we thought was bad. Right? So it's not binary. It's not, well, we said no, so we're never going anywhere. I'm not waiting for a promise from Jim Phillips or Brett, right? I'm not waiting for that. What I am trying to do is be your athletic director, turn this into the very best department we can. We're a top 30 football, a top 30 basketball program right now, and we're willing to compete with anybody. But I'm not going to go all the way out to the West Coast, especially if we made the move ourselves, right, and nobody else followed us. And then we're going to go out there with one arm tied behind our back in a fist fight. And then if we don't win, what is going to be the commentary from you and from the fans and everybody else? Well, he set us up. He didn't put us in a position to be successful, right? So I get that, and which is why I'm in a leadership position. I had to make the tough decision. But I think that's really important that folks understand that part of it. We didn't say no to our future. We just said no to a deal that we didn't think was a good deal the day we got the deal, and we had a very short window to be able to accept that deal or not. Right? So when you ask about negotiation, because I think that's going to come up too, we didn't have much time to negotiate based on the timetable we were given from the PAC at that time.
Can you say how long you had?
This thing happened really fast, so hours. This was when hours like that. This was moving from when we officially got an offer to when they wanted us to render a decision.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, just the report,
Yeah.
I was going to see if you could address the report that came out a day or two ago about you guys engaging the Big East. Was that something you guys did?
I'm engaging everybody. That's my job, right? Like I'm making no bones about that, right? I did it at my press conference when we talked about realignment. If Val wants to talk from the Big East, I'd love to talk to her. I'll talk to Conference USA. I'll talk to everybody. I don't want to go backwards, but I need to answer phone calls because this is a relationship business. Now, in true candor, I know most of those folks, so I talk to them all the time anyway, and it's not always about, hey, Memphis is looking for a home, right? Sometimes it's, hey, how are you doing? How are you dealing with this? How are your teams working with NIL in this space? Those kind of things. So I'm open, and I will listen, but what I'm not going to do is talk about offers we didn't have. The only official offer we had as an institution, to make it clear to everybody, was from the PAC at that time.
As this was going on, and including in those couple hours where you making the decision, how closely were you talking with AD's officials from Tulane, USF, and UTSA?
Can I ask you a question in return? Because you guys get to ask me all the questions.
Sure.
Do you know where I was at that time?
You were in DC.
So where was I? Lead one, with all the other FBS ADs in America, right? So there's about 80 of us. So the answer is obviously yes.
Well, the question is, were you going to make the decision together, or were you all making individual decisions?
That's not originally what you asked.
Okay, but now I've decided.
Right? I know, but look, I told you, I like to have some fun with it. I love what I do, right? So that's why, you see what it's like when I pose it back to you,
Of course,
right?
yeah.
So
No, you made me ask a better question.
there we go. So together we're going to get better, and I love that. And that's what I'm trying to do for Memphis, right? But no, to answer your question directly, it would have been tough to go it alone, but at the end of the day, I will, as long as that Dr. Hargrave and the board empowers me to make the best decision for the University of Memphis. It would have been tough to go it alone. I wouldn't have wanted to, but if the deal was good enough and we had to, we would have.
How much did uncertainty play a part? You addressed finances, but what about uncertainty over the media rights deal, over the playoff access specifically, and over who the other membership would be?
Well, there's no uncertainty about the playoff access, right? Because there is no automatic qualifier to the playoff except for the G5 right now and the A4, right? So let's just call that what it is. There's no uncertainty with that. I haven't heard Greg or Tony or anybody else come out and say they're, if the PAC was reconstituted in any form, that they're going to give them an automatic qualifier. So as far as I'm concerned, there was no uncertainty there. That was very certain. All of the financials are speculative. There's not a media rights party. You guys are in the media. Who are they partnered with from a linear or a streaming standpoint? I don't know. And so, yeah, that does factor into it. Because here's the worst thing that could have happened, right? I've heard some folks say, well, we're afraid to gamble, or other people have called me a coward, which I think is hysterical. I'm a lot of things, but that I'm not. And so when I look at it this way, we're going to take a leap of faith on something that could actually be a worse deal than we have now. And when I hear folks talk about the buyout and how others have figured that out, think about this. If you go to the Big 12 or you go to the ACC and you get half a share, that's still $17 to $20 million. That money, even in a speculative form, wasn't on the table for the University of Memphis, right? So it's a little bit easier to figure out when you know Fox is your partner, and if you go into that league, you're going to get a guaranteed amount of money, right? It's also easier to figure out if ESPN is your partner, and you're going to go into that league and you're going to get a certain amount of money, right? So that did play a part into it. Here's the other thing you all haven't asked. How much does linear play into this? By my account, we'll have 2 ESPNU games this year. We'll have 1 ESPN2 game, and we'll have 3 ESPN games. That's 6 ESPN games linear, right? There's not a lot of G5s in the country getting that, which is part of the reason why our brand is so strong now, too. So there's value to that that's harder to quantify as well.
Do you see a long-term future in the AAC, just given some of the lack of call it what it is, lack competition from some of the other schools, especially in regards to where you guys are in some of your premier sports?
Our aspiration is to compete at the highest level, and so I don't know if that's going to be the AAC, the ACC, the Big 12. That's why I said in the beginning, this is fluid for me. I said that in my initial press conference. I'm going to do what's best for Memphis and try to get us there. So what I'm trying to do, literally, because we just lost to Navy, we want to get back on the winning side. I'd like to get to 4-1. That's the focus, and I'm going to continue to evaluate the landscape as it moves forward. And that's also why I brought up in 2031 or 32, most of these media rights deals are up. We could see a format where the top football programs in the country are playing each other, right? The top 50, right? Because of more of a federated approach, right? Because of TV, because you're going to usually see more regional Olympic sports. Because not everyone wants to do what's going on in the Big Ten right now. Even some of the Big Ten folks don't want to do that and traverse the country like that. So for me to give you an answer about that, I would be speculating. I don't want to do that. That's not fair.
You and Commissioner Tempernetti are both complimenting each other on how straightforward you guys
Yeah,
are. So how does that relationship and breaking this down with him, how much easier did it make to have those conversations with him while you were going through this?
Listen, I don't think Tim probably doesn't love everything I say. I don't love everything Tim says, but the one thing we know about each other is we're honest, right? And that, for me, if that's a common denominator, that's great. I will tell you, throughout this process, working with South Florida, with Tulane, UTSA, we were very collegial in the process. So for me, I appreciated straightforwardness. I think it's helpful when you're trying to make these decisions. I also think Tim is willing to kick the tires on pretty much anything that he can do to make the conference better. You think about my situation, he hasn't been the commissioner much longer than I've been the AD, right? And he's sitting there trying to fight for the life of his conference. So anytime you're making these decisions, they're not easy. But when you're working with somebody who's up front like Tim, it makes it a little bit easier for us to make our decision. And so I think it helps, just because this way I'm not trying to figure out what the meaning is behind what he's saying. So I hope it was helpful for him, but for me it was somewhat helpful because I didn't have to guess.
Hey, Roman Cleary, Bluff City Media. Part of the reported terms of a potential Pac-12 deal was a 5-year grant of rights agreement that could have perhaps hindered your ability to move on something with the Big 12 or the ACC if something happened with either of those leagues. How accurate is that reporting, and if so, how much of a factor did that play into the decision to decline?
It's accurate, number one, and number two, I think that's actually a good deal for us because, again, I keep bringing up the fact that a lot of these deals are running concurrently, right? If they were offering a 10-year deal, that'd be something different, right? And so for me, I think that was an advantage to what they were actually offering, is that it would allow us to reevaluate the landscape at that time. So it's accurate, and I think it was actually an advantage on their part. Because if they were trying to lock somebody in longer than that, I think it would have been very difficult for them.
Did the funding of the Liberty Bowl in your current situation, raising money, did that have an impact on your decision?
That has an impact on every decision I make every day, right? Like, let's be honest. We got to fill in the hole, right? And we got to put more seats there, and we got to modernize the stadium. So that's always in the back of my mind. If I said it wasn't, I'd be disingenuous. But I don't think that was part of the calculus of saying, okay, we got to raise this much money. But there is a thing called donor fatigue, and I think that's where you're trying to get to. We'd have to raise the money to pay the exit fee, right? Which then prohibits our ability to ask those same donors for money, right, to be able to continue doing what we're doing on the stadium. And we're pretty close to unlocking that last $25 million, which is a huge landmark for us. So it was part of it, but it wasn't everything.
Dr. Scott, did you counter at all? Counter offer?
No, we didn't have a lot of time for a counter. We saw an offer, told them what we thought about the offer, and we made a decision at that time. Because the other thing I didn't want to do is just keep kicking this can down the road forever, because you guys were writing about this for several days. And so when we finally got an offer, we evaluated the offer and said that that's not an offer that we thought was great. So, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
How much engagement, if any, with the ACC or with the Big 12? And I know you said you're not waiting for a call from either of the commissioners, but since it started with the Pac-12, any engagement with them, and did any hope of something in perhaps a short-term factor into the decision-making, or was that not in the equation at all?
So, you asked the question, and I got to be honest with you, Tim. For me, you used the word hope. And remember what I talked about, the emotional toll that it's taken on our fans? I'm not hoping for anything. I'm going out trying to earn something, right? Where I come from, if you hope, you don't usually get what you want. You got to go out and do the work. And that's what I'm doing every day here. Jim Phillips, as you all know, is a friend of mine, right? I talk to Jim a lot, and it's not always about conference realignment. I don't know Brett, right, personally, but I know some folks associated with the Big 12. So that wasn't a factor into this part of the conversation of trying to say, okay, well, if we do this, we might not get an invite here. I think sometimes you guys, and gals, to be fair, make this more complicated than it really is, right? We had a decision at this time from the PAC, and we looked at that decision and we said, this is not the best move for Memphis. Our hope is, regardless of conference affiliation, as we move forward, is to compete with the best programs in the country, like we did against Florida State when we went to Tallahassee and we won. That's where I expect to be. That's what drives me every day when I wake up in the morning. I want to be the best AD I can be in this country, and I want this program to be the best. Everyone keeps focusing on these two conferences, and if you ask any of my staff in a staff meeting, we don't talk about realignment. We talk about getting 1% better. We talk about how are we positioning Memphis in an NIL standpoint. How are we positioning ourselves in the market, right? You know, how is our stadium moving forward so our fans can have a better experience? We don't spend nearly as much time as I think you all believe standing around talking about the Big 12 and the ACC. We just don't do it because it would be fruitless, right? Every moment I spend talking about them is one less dollar I can raise and less support that I can give my coaches and my staff. And so that's the easiest way for me to answer it, is that I'm not just calling the ACC and the Big 12 every day saying, hey, will you let us in? Will you let us in? And I think more about the city of Memphis, this university and our athletic department, than to take a bad deal, right? Like, I'm not going to do that, right? While I'm the athletic director at the University of Memphis, I'm not going to make decisions out of scarcity or desperation. I just don't think that's fair to the city. I don't think it's fair to our student athletes, and it's not fair to the university. So as I'm making those decisions, that's really important to me. Just because we haven't got those invites before doesn't mean they won't come in the future or that that's all we should be waiting for. I just think that's a very short-sighted approach to leadership, and that's not one that we take.
Off the back of that, is the goal still to try and get the school to a powerful conference, and do you feel confident that that's going to come at some point?
I'm very confident in what we do every day, and so when the offer comes, we'll be ready for it. That's the goal, is to get to the most powerful conferences in the country. Now, we could be in the in the AAC for a few more years, and what the new conferences look like after that, if it's not the ACC and the Big 12 and the SEC and the Big 10, you all are going to be asking me a variation of that question, right? Which is why I'm not trying to be coy. I'm answering it that way. I want to compete against the big boys and girls, and I want to beat them. And I know our coaches do. And I can tell you this because none of you asked, right, about the Olympic sports, and none of you asked about what our coaches thought. I don't know any coach in our portfolio that thought us making that move was going to put them in a better position to recruit or a better position to get in the postseason right now, right? Because our closest competitor, if we went alone, would have been Colorado State. Think about that, right? So every time we were going to compete against somebody, we're going all the way out to Colorado Springs. That's probably not the best decision to make if you want your student athletes to be able to compete at a high level.
I understand it's a hypothetical and it's complex, but you said you won't take a bad deal. What is the baseline of what a good deal looks like?
There's got to be a lot of pieces to it, right? It's got to be the right people. Geography matters. The financials have to make sense. It's got to be folks who have the same aspirations as us to either be at the highest level and sustain it or to compete at the highest level. And I have a lot of respect for my colleagues at Boise and San Diego State and Colorado State and who am I missing? Fresno State. I worked with Garrett when we were at GW. So I know what they want. But that deal didn't make sense. So to answer your hypothetical, I'd have to see the deal, I'd have to break it down, and then we'd have to make sense of it. But it's got to make sense for Memphis too, right? I want our fans to come to the stadium, and I want them to feel good about who we're playing, and I want them to fill it up, right? But I'm also not going to put us in a position that we do this stopgap, we lose money, we don't play well, and then people are upset about that too, right? So I want to make sure whatever deal we make, we feel is the best one for us. And so if there are other deals out there to be heard, I will listen to them, and we will listen to them as an institution, and then we will evaluate them, and then we'll make a strong decision about what that means for the future of Memphis. So,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
guys.